So, top story, this is kind of interesting. IBM has acquired cast iron systems for cloud integration. The press release, they stated, using cast iron systems, hundreds of pre-built templates and services expertise, expensive custom coding can be eliminated, allowing cloud integrations to be completed in the space of days rather than weeks or longer. You know, so again, it's just that whole timeliness, being able to speed things up. But really what I want to get at with this story, this is really a fundamental shift in thinking in terms of an established enterprise software vendor. Normally they would not be talking this language. So is this announcement IBM's way of saying that the old models of custom integration are obsolete? Mark.
Yes, it is diametrically opposed to everything IBM has almost ever stood for throughout its entire existence. So it's like I'm struggling to think of the analogy, but it's like the Empire in Star Wars suddenly saying, "Oh, we love freedom. It's awesome." And not that IBM's evil, but this is very against the grain of what they do. They typically sell services, so they sell hardware.
It would be like Apple using Flash.
Yes, it would be like Apple using Flash. So it's almost shocking that they would come out and say something like this. So they must feel.
I'm surprised they let the press release even have that kind of quote.
Well, it's smart. I mean, it's smart because people are feeling somebody else is going to do it if they don't, right? So if you don't cannibalize your own existing marketplace, somebody else will. It's been done to them before by Microsoft, and ad nauseum, this story has happened again and again. So for them to come out and say, you know what, we're just going to have these templates available. We acquired this company to do this, and we're going to throw this stuff out there. You don't really need our services anymore. Use our templates and our software, and that will onboard you into the cloud. It's great. I think it's a smart move.
Yeah, me too. Sundar, do you have any thoughts on this announcement?
Yeah, this is very consistent with the technology evolution. If you step back and look at the 10 years before Web 2.0, you had client-server technology. Everyone claimed client-server will replace mainframe. And then we all claimed web will replace client-server. What I feel is most of these technologies are very additive in nature. People don't throw away their mainframe. Completely agree with you that it's a very revolutionary thinking on the part of IBM. But we have seen companies go to cloud and bring their enterprise applications at SkyTab and use it in conjunction with the software investments that they have made in their data centers. In other words, cloud is acting as an extension of their existing data centers. New applications, new models are being created in the cloud. At the same time, people rarely ever throw away their old way of thinking or old investments that they have made. So we welcome IBM. I think more the better. But we also think this is a nice way of expanding the cloud market.
Sure. And what about you, Manish? Do you think that this is really where the big enterprise software guys are going to start going?
Right. I mean, this is definitely a very interesting move. But, one thing I wanted to mention is that if you look at IBM's traditional customer base, it's been more of the enterprise customers. And what they are really trying to do here is get into the mid-market, because what we have seen in the last 2 to 3 years is that mid-market is adopting cloud-based services and SaaS services in a big way. And that's not been traditionally a strong market for IBM's professional services, but this lets them get in an economical manner.
So you don't think it's a shift? You think it's actually market expansion?
I mean, yeah, because, see, IBM has been selling a lot of professional services, actually, to the enterprise market, but they have struggled to do so in the mid-market because of affordability. This lets them get there because since your mid-market companies are now adopting Salesforce, they are adopting all these standard cloud-based solutions, this lets them get into that market. They wouldn't have sold a lot of professional services there in the first place. Now, there will be some erosion in the enterprise market, but, I think this is more of a mid-market play for them.
Interesting. This actually squares with where we think the sweet spot in the cloud has been over the past years, so that makes sense.
So I'm curious just to see who else comes out with similar sorts of announcements in the weeks to come. All right, well, story number 2. I'm actually going to start with a question on this one because it's such an obvious one and we haven't asked it before. Who the heck owns cloud.com?
We have never asked that. I know.
We've never asked that. So Dell owns cloudcomputing.com.
Right. But they don't own cloud.com.
Right, but they do not own cloud.com. So this is kind of a TMZ sort of story for cloud here because there's even discrepancy in terms of who has owned the domain name before.
I think that's the big controversy facing what I read. So VM Ops owns it now.
Yes,
if you go and look at
VMOps is a startup that just purchased it in early 2010.
So we know who owns Cloud.com now. We don't have to go to who is and go look it up.
Exactly, we know.
But we don't know who owned
it before.
That's the weird thing.
Yes.
So that's the mystery. So why don't you tell us about the mystery?
Well, the mystery is, it was owned by what they're saying an individual in the tech business. And they wouldn't say how much it was sold for. None of the details are out there. They're being very tight-lipped about it. So it's a discrepancy between two people. It was either the personal website of the live journal creator Brad Fitzpatrick or Scott Heiferman, the CEO and co-founder of Meetup.
Yes.
So Brad is saying that it was actually owned by Scott and that I guess Brad was hosting a personal site on something that Scott was doing.
So this is my reading of it. I read the same article.
Yeah.
So my reading of it was that Brad Fitzpatrick, live journal creator, was hosting it. So if you went and looked at who is, it would say Brad Fitzpatrick is the one who has it.
Exactly.
But Brad is saying the person who actually owned it was Scott Heiferman.
Right.
Right. Which happens all the time. I've actually parked my domains with friends who had extra server space or whatever, for one reason or another. And so my reading, and then when they contacted Scott, Scott was like, no comment.
Yeah.
And just basically was, nope, not talking about it.
They don't want to talk about it.
So my guess is, and this is just a guess, I know nothing, but based on sort of how I know how these things sort of go down, I'll bet Scott basically asked Brad to host it for him. Brad said yes. He hosted it for him, and now that it's sold, Scott doesn't want to say how much he made and get into the whole that discussion.
Exactly.
So
I would place my bets the same. But at any rate, this startup that purchased Cloud.com is VMOPS, but they're actually going to start calling themselves Cloud.com now.
Yes.
Now that they own the domain, which is interesting. Very brilliant. Great marketing move.
Yep.
So they purchased it in early 2010, and then yesterday they just relaunched the site, the new site. And so their offering is an open source software for building cloud networks. It's similar to Eucalyptus.
Okay.
And they're calling it Cloud Stack, and 98% of it is from software license under the GNU Public License.
Ah, okay.
So just wanted to throw that out there. I mean, does anybody else have any comments on the whole Cloud.com thing? Have you heard anything yourselves? Sundar, have you heard anything?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they're going to gain any more traction just by naming themselves Cloud. For what it's worth, we call our product SkyTab Cloud. I think it's more to do with the technology underneath it. Everything these days, including individual hardware appliance vendors, are calling themselves as cloud vendors. So we'll see how this evolves.
Exactly.
I totally disagree with you. I'd like to introduce the Cloud Pad. All I have to do is call it Cloud something, and it's the Cloud. No, just kidding.
The Cloud Pad. I knew you had to bring it up.
I had to bring it up.
Well, if people want to learn about their Cloud Pad, when is the iPad show?
That is at 4 o'clock tomorrow, so on Thursdays.
Thursdays at 4 p.m.
Yep. This week in Cloud, or sorry, this week in iPad.
This week in iPad.
This week in iPad. This week in Cloud Pad. No, this week in iPad.
All right, well, let's move on. Story number 3, NTT America has announced its own enterprise cloud computing solution, and it actually leverages the OpSource clouds. So we've had OpSource as a guest before on the show, and their CEO, Treb Ryan, who we spoke with, said the OpSource cloud capabilities combine the flexibility, availability, and community of the public cloud with the security, performance, and control the enterprise needs. So the companies that, these two companies, NTT and OpSource, they're banking on the notion that pairing the OpSource cloud with NTT America's secure data center infrastructure will help remove the barriers to entry for enterprise clouds. What do you think, Sundar?
I think that's a fair and smart comment on the part of Treb, I guess. I think a lot of enterprises these days are in early stages of adoption. Specifically, they have questions around security, scalability, and reliability of cloud infrastructure. And they also want to, as we were discussing earlier, they don't want to throw away all the investments they have made in their data center. Companies have spent millions, if not billions of dollars building their data centers and applications. They are looking at cloud as an extension of their data center that requires them to administer their policies. So I agree with a lot of the comment. I think the companies that can provide the bridge between current data centers and cloud infrastructure, allow flexible move between the data centers, would benefit a lot from this adoption curve.
What about you, Mark? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I read the story and it sort of felt like, it just sounded like NTT was doing a Me Too kind of play. I mean, to be honest with you, it didn't really sound like there was anything terribly new there. If you knew.
Well, they're leveraging OpSource cloud, so I mean, it's already OpSource.
Right. So I just kind of went, okay, so there's another company providing cloud services that sound pretty much like everyone else that I've heard so far. So
Manish, do you
wasn't
agree?
exciting to me.
Manish, do you think that they're just jumping on the bandwagon for cloud?
Right. I mean, the interesting thing which we are seeing with the cloud is it's becoming more of a commodity play, which is not a bad thing. It makes it cheaper and affordable for the markets. But what that does is that it allows the big players to come in. We've already seen Amazon there for a long time, and now we're seeing a lot of big players come in. So really, this is an attempt by NTT to, enter that market as it should, and it already has a lot of customer base where it can sell into.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is their size for you. The fact that a player that large is moving in, they believe it's a commodity, and so is that
right? I mean, I think it's a great way for a company like NTT to monetize their existing customer base with cloud-based services, and it's a win-win situation because for OpSource, they get a huge channel to kind of sell those services through.
Sure, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Fair enough. Moving on, we have a lot of government stories pop up as it relates to cloud.
We have like one a week.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's interesting. So the federal government is soon going to be announcing the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Pilot Program. Say that 10 times fast. It's called FedRAMP.
Or FedRAMP.
Or FedRAMP.
Yes.
Let's just say FedRAMP. And its goals are to create a single set of cloud computing standards across the entire government and to ease the agency certification process. Peter Mell from NIST, what's NIST?
National Institute of something.
Yeah, of something.
Standards.
Yeah, is chairing the Federal Cloud Computing Advisory Council, so I'm going to keep my eyes open for things coming out of him. But what I want to get at with this one is whether it succeeds or fails, how do you think the FedRAMP program will impact the cloud computing market overall? Because so much is being focused on government right now, and other countries are looking to the U.S. government as it's relating to cloud computing. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think before anybody answers that, I just want to clarify a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So what this means is that if one federal government agency approves a vendor's cloud setup in terms of security, in terms of capabilities, et cetera, then that means all federal government. So right now, if one, so basically the Department of Housing approves it.
Yep.
That doesn't mean that the RS can go and use it without going through the same approval process, right?
Exactly.
So this is an attempt
standardizing the whole process.
Centralize centralize the approval process for all the federal government, for all vendors.
Mm-hmm.
So to that extent, I think if it fails, then the market, it doesn't open up the federal market, or at least greatly hinders the development of the federal market. If it succeeds, I think it greatly helps the development of the federal market. I think it's really great for everyone. So I think everyone here hopes that it's going to succeed.
Or do you think that cloud computing vendors are going to look at it as just the niche vertical of government, or do you think they'll look at that?
No, I think they will if it fails.
Yeah.
Because then it's just like, any one of these departments is potentially not large enough. I guess it depends on who you are, but if they can sell into the entire federal government en masse, I think that is obviously much more attractive to them.
Sure. Manish, what do you think? Do you think that FedRAMP is really going to impact the cloud computing market?
Yeah, I think it is going to impact, but in another 3 years, because by the time it rolls out and by the time it's in operation, it's going to definitely take time. But once it does, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is basically bringing a cloud mainstream into the federal government, because now you can get a contract, one contract with a central agency, and you have the ability to scale up.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely. Sundar, do you have any thoughts on this? What do you think about the standardization piece?
I think I agree with everything that has been said. One other perspective I would offer is federal government is one of the largest IT spenders. So the standardization process helps younger companies like us to not have to deal with 20 different agencies. Typically, young startup companies don't focus on the federal market because the process is usually very time-consuming and it takes a long time to get something done. If the standardization occurs, then the adoption can come faster. 3 years seems to be a good estimate.
Okay.
That makes sense, actually. Yeah, the federal government is a lot longer lead time. So,
exactly.
Sure.
Well, moving on, story number 5. Intel has led a $40 million investment round in Virtue Streams cloud service. So they're a data center co-location and services company, and they're expanding with the purchase of 2 data centers, one in California, one in Virginia, and the release of Xstream. So that's their cloud platform, and it's aimed at mid-size enterprises. So the question with this, I mean, 40 million. Are we going to be seeing more investments of this size and stature, or are we going to be seeing more acquisitions? We've seen a lot of those too. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I know. I'm not quite sure what's in Intel's mind here. I did read the article briefly, and I was trying to puzzle it out. I ran out of time, actually, to go through everything I wanted to go through to figure this one out, so I'm going to throw this one to our guests.
Okay. Manish, what are your thoughts? Do you think we're going to see more investments of this size, or do you think we're going to see more acquisitions in cloud computing?
I mean, I think it's in line with the trend which we have already seen, like the Entity America trend. I mean, large corporations who were earlier providing one layer of the infrastructure, like Intel was providing hardware and, Microsoft might be providing software, they are fast realizing that they need to morph into being a cloud vendor because people are buying the whole stack. So, it's just in line with them. This investment is a way for Intel to remain in the market so that if it were to offer cloud-based services, it can do that easily. And so I think it's definitely going to be a trend we're going to see with the larger vendors going ahead.
Okay. Sundar, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's very similar to the telecom model. If you think about how companies were investing, AT&T and Sprint and others, they built these mega networks. But in the end, what's really winning over are the apps. So there would be some amount of additional investments, but I think there is plenty of cloud computing infrastructure capacity being built between Amazon and Google and Salesforce and companies like us. I think real adoption will accelerate when the right applications come along, whether it's existing applications or newer applications.
Okay. And speaking of data centers, particularly in Virginia, Microsoft is rumored to be close to a deal to build a data center in Christiansburg, Virginia.
Yep.
And the website Data Center Knowledge recently announced the top 10 data centers in the world ranked by square footage, and 4 of them are owned by Microsoft. So, they're all in.
They're all in the cloud. As Steve Ballmer said several weeks ago, we are all in. We're betting everything, all our chips.
All the chips are in.
Ready to go.
But what I'm wondering is, more than anything, is cloud computing going to impact server sales?
What do you mean?
Well, we're looking at, all of these data centers. More and more people are creating their own data centers. On the hardware side.
So, theoretically, cloud computing gives you efficiencies in terms of hardware. So, theoretically, yes, and it would lower the number of servers that are sold. So it probably explains one of the reasons why Intel is getting into actually providing cloud services, because once you sell the machine, it's done, and you're going to sell less of them. However, if you're selling cloud services, then you can resell it and resell it and resell it, and basically amortize the cost over. Basically, the cost of the machine is X, and you can get X plus a large Y that you actually end up selling to end user or end customers.
Right.
So, so in this instance, I think Microsoft has said that they're in for long haul in the cloud. So I think this is more about software for them than it is hardware.
Okay. What do you think, Sundar? Are we looking at, Microsoft is focusing on expanding out, building another data center? How is this impacting things?
I think your earlier question on will it impact server sales? It's a very good one. I think it's the time horizon is important. Right now, the cloud computing model is in very nascent early stages. So companies are still buying servers, installing it in their data centers, while they're tipping their toes in trying to figure out how to use this public cloud infrastructure, whether it's provided by Microsoft or Google or Salesforce, or virtual private cloud infrastructure like SkyTabs. Over time, when these infrastructure gains mainstream adoption, you can anticipate companies don't have to buy as many data centers or servers as they need to. But I think in the short term, over the next 3 to 5 years, you will actually see more servers being sold because 2 types of infrastructures are simultaneously being created, the current model and then the new model. So I actually think it's a good thing for Intel to be investing because it's going to continue to expand their market for them.
That's a really interesting point. So in the short term, server sales are probably doing really well because you still have companies that are buying stuff internally and jumping on the cloud.
That's a very good insight. Yeah, the time schedule is. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. Actually, it's probably very good right now.
Yeah, Manish, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, actually, you have to repeat the question because I was having a little bit of hard time hearing
sure.
Yeah.
We're talking about how Microsoft is about to close a deal on another data center that they're going to put in Virginia, and that out of the top 10 data centers in the world ranked by square footage, 4 of them are owned by Microsoft. And when you look at just the impact of cloud computing overall right now, is it impacting server sales?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting metric because what's happening really is that if you look at the number of units sold in terms of servers, yes, you'll see the impact. But if you look at the number of processors sold, you may not actually see the impact because what's happening is as you're moving to the cloud, the density of processors to servers is increasing dramatically with blades and with new platforms. So it's becoming much more efficient to deploy them. So, it's an interesting stat, but you may see the servers go down, but the processing is going up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you just made me think about this. In cloud computing is a gold rush. The shovels are servers. So, and there will be a lot of losers as well as winners, I think. So,
Exactly.
But whoever sells the shovels will definitely win.
The shovels.
At least in the beginning.
You've got great analogies.
Well, it's my author powers coming to bear. So.